Ukraine is ready to discuss a possible buffer zone in parts of Donbas, but only on one simple condition, the Ukrainian president told journalists. Ukraine will not pull back its troops unless Russia does the same at the exact time. Officials in the presidential administration say the concept can only work if it includes strict international monitoring, clear rules on what weapons must be pulled back, and a mechanism that prevents Russia from using the pause to regroup or advance. They stress this is not an agreed decision, not a concession, and not a political commitment. It is one of the scenarios being studied, and any final decision can only be made after the highest political level or by the Ukrainian people. The administration also underscores that Russia must contribute to Ukraine's reconstruction, calling it a mandatory element of any eventual peace agreement. Diplomatic work is intensifying. The US, Germany, France, the UK and Ukraine are preparing for a high-level meeting in Paris to coordinate positions on security guarantees and post-war recovery. But the political atmosphere remains tense. President Trump has criticized Ukraine over postponed elections and claimed negotiations are at a dead end. Ukrainian officials push back, saying the real dead end is Russia's refusal to end the war. For now, discussions continue, but nothing is settled, and every scenario depends on details, enforcement, and security guarantees that Ukraine can trust. Drone strikes sets one of Russia's biggest oil refineries on fire. One of Russia's largest oil refineries went up in flames overnight after a powerful drone attack hit the Slavneft plant in Yaroslavl, more than 700 kilometers from Moscow. Residents reported at least 7 explosions, and videos on social media show a huge fire lighting up the night sky above the industrial zone. Earlier that evening, the regional governor had warned locals about a drone threat. Slavneft is not just another refinery. It's one of the top 5 biggest in Russia, capable of processing around 15 million tons of crude oil per year. It produces gasoline, jet fuel and lubricants, products that matter both for Russia's economy and for its military. Despite the visible fire and the scale of the blast, Russian officials remain mostly silent about the real damage. The Ministry of Defense instead claimed its air defense destroyed 90 drones across several regions overnight, including 8 allegedly shot down over Yaroslavl. This is not the first time the refinery has caught fire. It briefly went up in flames in early October, with local authorities insisting the cause back then was technical, not a drone strike. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov has effectively rejected 7 major points of the US peace plan for Ukraine, according to the Institute for the Study of War. He dismissed proposals to freeze the front line in the south, place the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant under IAEA control, allow NATO enlargement without returning to 1997 borders, provide Ukraine with the security guarantees, confirm Ukraine's sovereignty, station European fighter jets in Poland, and adopt EU rules on protecting religious minorities. Instead, Lavrov is pushing Russia's old 2021 demands, which would undermine NATO's current security structure. Institute for the Study of War says the Kremlin has no intention of accepting the plan as written and will demand even more concessions, even if Ukraine agrees to some parts. Despite Lavrov's talk of progress in discussions with the US, Moscow's position remains unchanged. Russia continues to exaggerate its military giants to pressure Kyiv and the West and to create an impression that Ukraine's resistance is weakening. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is warning that the alliance can no longer think of the war as something happening far away. His message in Berlin is straightforward. After Ukraine, Russia will look at NATO, and the risk for the alliance is already real. Rutte says too many governments in Europe still don't feel the urgency of the moment. NATO needs to move faster, spend more on defense, and prepare for a world where security can be taken for granted. He also points to why Russia is still able to keep the war going. China supplies the critical components for Russian drones and weapons, while North Korea and Iran provide ammunition and equipment. Without this support, Moscow wouldn't be capable of sustaining a long war. And there is a timeline. According to Rutte, Russia could be in a position to threaten NATO countries with a few years if Europe doesn't accelerate its defenses. The message is clear. Ukraine must receive everything needed for self-defense, and NATO must rebuild its own military strength quickly. Despite the Kremlin's loud claims of progress on all fronts and a supposedly strong, resilient economy, the reality is very different. Russia is entering the hardest phase of the war militarily, economically, and socially. On the battlefield, the Russian advance is slow, costly, and unimpressive. Even the highly publicized claim of capturing Pokrovsk doesn't match what's happening. Ukrainian forces are still holding the line, and Russian war bloggers admit the offensive is grinding and directionless. Economically, the pressure is mounting. Oil and gas revenues are down 22%. The deficit is rising. Inflation is climbing, and half of the entire state budget now goes to war. Economists say Russia today is busy but poor, and the real pain will show in 2026. Socially, the picture is changing too. 3 times more Russian reports worsening living conditions than improvement. Support for the war is shallow and largely forced. 88% of Russians want the war to end, but less than half believe Putin will actually end it. Even attitudes towards veterans and shifting. Only 40% see them as heroes. For many, they are either victims or a problem the state created and now can't manage. Putin isn't preparing for peace. He's tightening control and increasing repression. Because ending the war won't fix Russia's problem, it will expose them. Europe is preparing a major move against Russia's shadow fleet, the network of tankers that secretly move Kremlin oil and help fund the war. According to Euroactive, EU countries are now working on a common interpretation of international maritime law that would give national authorities far more power to board and inspect suspicious vessels. Why this matters? Over the past year, several underwater sabotage incidents targeting pipelines and communication cables have been linked to ships operating with fake identities, switched off trackers, and constantly changing flags. Until now, European states have struggled to hold anyone accountable because these vessels hide their true nationality. But Brussels is changing the game. Under the new approach, EU states say they have their right to board ships on the high seas if they sail without a flag, under a false flag, or use forged documents, all common tricks of Russia's shadow fleet. Countries like Denmark have already tightened controls, and the EU could formally adopt these rules very soon. Ukraine is also pushing back. Just recently, authorities in Odessa detained a vessel from Russia's shadow fleet that had been illegally shipping Ukrainian grain from occupied Crimea. Its owner was under Ukrainian sanctions and kept changing the ship's name and papers to dodge restrictions. Britain is now openly preparing for the possibility of a major war. And for the first time in decades, the message is clear. This is not just about the army, it's about preparing the entire country. UK Veterans Minister Alistair Carner said the government is rapidly developing new plans to get the nation ready if a conflict breaks out. The reason hostile intelligence activity, spying, hacking, and direct threats has increased by more than 50% in just 1 year. The main suspects, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. London is now creating a new counterintelligence service, merging military intel units into a unified structure called military intelligence. And for the first time since the Cold War, considering a modern version of a national wartime transition plan. Carnes put it bluntly, the shadow of war is again at Europe's door. We must be ready. And he stressed something important. Wars aren't won only by armies. They won by societies, industries, and economies. All this is happening while the British Army is at its smallest size since the 80s, which only adds urgency to the message. Viktor Orban is once again attacking Brussels. The Hungarian Prime Minister called the EU's vote on permanently blocking Russia from reclaiming its frozen assets a form of Brussels dictatorship. The EU is moving ahead with a written procedure that avoids a single country veto. The European Commission's proposal would formally ensure that Russian assets frozen in the EU cannot be returned to the Kremlin. Until now, this required unanimous renewal every 6 months. Orban argues that removing unanimity is illegal, claiming it destroys the rule of law and puts EU institutions above the treaties, all, as he says, to continue a losing war in Ukraine. At the same time, EU officials are pushing to approve the measure quickly, precisely to prevent Orban from blocking it. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico also voiced objections, saying he will not support using frozen Russian assets to provide a reparations loan to Ukraine if any of the funds go toward defense. Brussels, however, is preparing a mechanism for indefinite blocking of Russian assets and plans to use the profits from those assets to support Ukraine in 2026 and 27.
The European Union is set to lock up Russian frozen assets today. Until now, Russian money held in the EU was simply frozen, and the freeze had to be renewed every 6 months. In order to do that, they needed the unanimity of all EU member states, and some countries like Hungary or Slovakia were making it difficult. The EU hopes to use that money, held until Russia ends the war and compensates Ukraine, for a loan to finance Ukraine's budget and military needs over the next 2 years. But the main issue remains. Most of that money, 193 billion euros, is being held in Belgium. And Belgium fears that the move could be illegal and fears that it will have to face the potential consequences alone. So, today's decision is an important first step, but it does not guarantee that the EU will actually be able to use that money.
That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.